My family betrayed me over $80K of my inheritance for my brother's wedding. But when my cousin exposed the fiancé's secret messages, the humiliation was brutal, and they never saw it coming. I'm 27 years old. I work in digital marketing for a mid-sized company, and I basically spent the last 6 months dealing with the worst family drama of my life. All over money I don't even have access to yet. The thing is, my grandfather, who passed away like 5 years ago, left me a trust fund that I can only touch when I turn 30. And that unleashed a level of family insanity I never thought I'd see. Especially coming from my younger brother Brandon and his fiancée Allison, who turned out to be basically the devil incarnate but in designer dresses. Let me backtrack a bit so you understand all the context. My grandfather was an amazing guy, seriously, one of those old-school men who worked their whole lives and built something from scratch. He had a small chain of hardware stores in our town and neighboring towns. Nothing flashy, but he did well. And when he died, he left some things to all of us. He left my parents the house they lived in, and some money to expand their bakery, which is the family business. He left Brandon his classic truck, a '72 Ford that my grandfather adored. And he left me this trust fund that, according to the terms he set up with his lawyer, I can only use when I turn 30, and only for specific things: additional education, buying a house, or serious medical emergencies. It's not a ridiculous amount like a soap opera millionaire inheritance, but it's considerable, around $180,000, which in our small town is pretty good money. You know what I mean? My grandfather was very clear in his will about why he left it specifically to me. I was the only granddaughter who actually spent time with him after my grandmother died. Every Sunday, I'd go to his house, help him with yard work. We'd watch those history documentaries he loved together, and I basically made sure he wasn't alone. Brandon was always busy with his friends or sports, and my cousins, well, they hardly ever showed up. I didn't do it for the money, obviously, because I didn't. I'd even know he was going to leave me anything. I did it because I loved him, and it made me sad to see him alone. But I guess he noticed and wanted to reward me somehow. The truth is, for years this wasn't a problem for anyone. My family always knew about the trust fund, but since I couldn't touch it until 30, it was like this abstract thing that existed but didn't matter day to day. My parents, Sharon and Edward, have their bakery that does well. They're not rich, but they don't lack anything either. Brandon worked with them after dropping out of college, something my parents never let me forget that I actually finished, by the way, and everything was relatively normal. I lived in a small apartment, like half an hour away, worked hard, paid my bills, and the trust fund was simply my plan for the future, you know, for when I turned 30 and could use it for a down payment on a house or something. Everything changed about a year ago when Brandon met Allison. She showed up from one of those dating apps, and from the beginning it was clear she came from a completely different world than ours. Her family had money, like real money. Her dad owned several luxury car dealerships in the big city about 2 hours from here. Allison had gone to expensive private universities, had that air of a person who's never had to worry about money, you know what I mean? She wore designer clothes, drove a BMW her parents gave her, and talked about international trips like they were going to the grocery store. At first I thought she was just different from us, but not necessarily a bad person. Brandon was completely in love, like I'd never seen him like that with anyone, and my parents were fascinated because Allison was polite, pretty, and came from a good family, as my mom said. I was more cautious because there was something about the way Allison looked at our house, our bakery, our things, that made me uncomfortable. Like she was constantly evaluating everything and finding it insufficient, you know what I mean? After like 6 months of dating, Brandon proposed to her. It was a whole production. He took her to this fancy restaurant in the city, diamond ring that probably cost him all his savings, and she said yes. My parents were ecstatic. They organized a huge family dinner to celebrate, and even I was happy for Brandon because, well, he's my brother and I want him to be happy. Even though Allison wasn't exactly my favorite person. The first real sign of trouble came like 2 months after the engagement. We were all having dinner at my parents' house, something we did almost every Sunday, and Allison very casually brought up the trust fund. She said something like, "Hey Ruby, your 30th birthday is in like 2.5 years, right? Do you already have plans for that trust money?" And I told her yes, that I was thinking of using it to buy a house, that had basically been the plan all along. She just sat there kind of nodding, but with this weird smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then said, "Oh, that's nice. It must be nice to have that financial security waiting for you." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but looking back, that was the first time she set her sights on my money. The following weeks, the more direct comments started, like if I really needed all that money just for myself. If I had considered that Brandon was my only brother and it would be nice to share a little, that in her family everyone helped each other with things like that. I tried to ignore her or change the subject, but Allison was persistent in a super uncomfortable way. Things escalated really fast when Allison and Brandon started planning the wedding. Turns out Allison had very specific ideas about how she wanted her wedding, and all those ideas cost an absurd amount of money. We're talking about an event for 300 people, at a super expensive venue, with imported flowers, live band, premium open bar, everything. Allison's parents said they'd put up half the cost, and they expected my parents and Brandon to cover the other half, which was already problematic because my parents don't have that kind of money available without selling something or going into debt. That's when Allison had her brilliant idea. One day, she invited me to lunch, just the two of us, said she wanted to get to know me better and create more connection because we were going to be sisters. I went because, well, she was going to be my sister-in-law, and I thought maybe I was being too hard on her. We went to this nice Italian restaurant, ordered food, we were talking about normal things, and then she dropped the bomb. She told me, "Ruby, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think I have a proposal that could benefit all of us. Brandon and I really want to have our dream wedding, but it's expensive. And you have that trust fund you won't be able to touch for another 2.5 years. So I thought, what if you give us a portion of that money now? Let's say $80,000, and we use it for the wedding and a down payment on a house? It's an investment in the family, right? And besides, when you turn 30, you'd still have $100,000 left, which is more than enough to buy your own house." I was literally left with my mouth open. I told her, "Allison, I can't access that money until 30. Those are the trust rules. And even if I could, no, I'm not going to give half my inheritance for your wedding." She got all defensive and said she was just trying to find a solution that would help everyone, that family supports each other, and that she thought I'd be more generous with my only brother. I ended up paying for my part of the bill and leaving because I was too angry to continue that conversation. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was completely wrong. Allison obviously went and told Brandon everything, but with her own version, where I was the selfish sister who refused to help her own brother. Brandon called me that same night, all worked up, telling me he couldn't believe I was so selfish, that grandfather would have wanted me to help the family, that $80,000 wasn't that much for me but would be transformative for them. I tried to explain to him that first, I couldn't legally access the money, and second, that money was my personal inheritance, that grandfather left specifically to me with clear conditions. Brandon didn't want to hear anything, he just kept repeating Allison's arguments like they were a script. The worst part was when my parents got involved. Allison had gone to talk to them too, supposedly crying, saying she just wanted to have a nice wedding and start her marriage right, but that I refused to help. My parents called me for a family chat that turned out to be basically an ambush. The three of them, my parents and Brandon, sitting in the living room of my childhood home, telling me I should reconsider, that family comes first, that I didn't need all that money, that Brandon had worked hard in the bakery and deserved help too. I explained to them 1,000 times that it wasn't just that I didn't want to, it was that I literally couldn't access the money until I turned 30. My mom said there must be some way to ask the lawyer for an exception for special family circumstances. My dad said I could take out a loan against the trust and give it to Brandon, and then pay it back when I had access to the full money. Each suggestion was more ridiculous than the last, and I was sitting there thinking, are they seriously suggesting I go into debt to pay for my brother's wedding? The pressure became unbearable. Allison started making passive-aggressive comments every time we saw each other at family events. Things like, "Oh, Ruby came. What a surprise. I thought you were too busy counting your money to spend time with us." Or, "It must be nice not to have to worry about money like the rest of us mortals." Brandon stopped talking to me completely, except to send me articles about the importance of supporting family or stories about siblings who helped each other. But what really destroyed me was when my mom started treating me differently. She had always been closer to Brandon. He was the baby, the boy, the golden boy who could do whatever he wanted. I was always the responsible one, the one who got good grades, the one who graduated from college, the one who had a stable job. And now suddenly I was the selfish one, the one who didn't care about family. My mom started making comments like, "Your grandfather would be disappointed to see how you're behaving," or, "I never thought I'd raise such a money-focused daughter." That hurt more than I can explain because my mom knew. She knew perfectly well that I had spent all those Sundays with grandfather, that I was the one who was there for him. And now she was using his memory to manipulate me. My dad was less direct but equally annoying, always suggesting I should find a middle ground or think about the big family picture. Things escalated even more when Allison started involving the extended family. Apparently, she'd been calling my uncles, aunts, cousins, telling them her version of the story where I was the rich, selfish villain who refused to help her brother with his wedding. Suddenly, I started getting messages from relatives I hadn't seen in years, all with opinions about what I should do with my money. My Aunt Patricia, who I'd never liked, sent me a literally 10-paragraph text message about how family should come first and how I was being immature. The only relative who supported me was my cousin Tiffany, who's like 29 and has always been more like a sister to me than a cousin. She called me after Allison tried to recruit her for her anti-Ruby campaign and told me, "You're completely right. Don't let them manipulate you. That money is yours, and grandfather left it to you for a reason." Tiffany was literally my lifeline through all this because I felt like I was going crazy. Like, I was the only person who saw how absurd the whole situation was. One day, like 3 months after all this started, Allison and Brandon asked me to meet with them to talk civilly about the issue. I agreed because, honestly, I was exhausted from the constant conflict and thought maybe they'd finally understood my position. We met at a coffee shop, and it seemed like they were going to be reasonable at first. Brandon apologized for being so insistent, said he understood my perspective, and I thought, okay, finally this is going to be resolved. But then Allison pulled out a folder. An actual folder with printed papers. Turns out she'd been researching trusts and had found examples of cases where early access had been achieved for family reasons. She showed me printouts from legal forums, articles about how to negotiate with trustees. She'd even contacted a lawyer to ask about options. I told her that was completely inappropriate, that she had no right to be investigating my private, financial situation, and that my answer was still no. Then Brandon dropped what was clearly their planned move. He said, "Ruby, we're asking you for $50,000, not $80,000. We've cut back on some wedding expenses. It's a reasonable amount that will leave you with most of your trust intact. If you can't access the money now, sign a legal document promising to give it to us when you turn 30. It's simple." And I was just staring at them thinking, who the hell are these people? Is my brother really asking me to sign a contract to give him half my inheritance? I told them no, that my answer was no and would always be no, and I got up to leave. Allison yelled at me in the middle of the coffee shop that I was a selfish bitch and that I was going to regret this. People were staring at us. I was shaking with rage and shame, and Brandon was just sitting there with his head in his hands like I was the one making a scene. After that, things got really ugly. My parents organized what they called a family intervention. They invited my uncles, some cousins, and basically put together this whole event where I was supposed to sit and listen to everyone tell me why I was wrong. I went because, stupidly, I thought maybe it was my chance to explain my side to everyone at the same time. It was horrible. One by one, they went around saying their piece about why I should help Brandon. That family is the most important thing. That money isn't everything. That grandfather would have wanted me to share. That I was young and had time to earn my own money. When I tried to defend my position, they interrupted me or told me I was being defensive. My Aunt Patricia literally said I had always been difficult, and that this just proved I hadn't matured. Tiffany tried to defend me, but they shut her down, saying this wasn't her problem. I left there crying, feeling completely betrayed by my own family. Tiffany caught up with me in the parking lot and hugged me while I basically had a complete breakdown. She told me this whole situation was crazy, that they were completely out of line, and that I should consider distancing myself from everyone for a while. But here's where things got really shady. Like a week later, I got an email from Human Resources at my work, asking me to contact them about a confidential matter. I thought it was something routine. But when I called, they told me someone had made an anonymous complaint, suggesting I'd been using company resources for personal matters and had mentioned having access to a large amount of money that had raised flags about possible fraud or conflict of interest. I froze. This was clearly Allison. She was the only one who'd been obsessed with my financial situation, and this was exactly the kind of twisted thing she would do. Luckily, my boss knows me well and the complaint went nowhere because it was obviously false and malicious. But the fact that someone tried to sabotage my job, my only income, over this dispute, made me realize how far they were willing to go. That was my breaking point. I contacted a lawyer, the same one who had handled my grandfather's will, and explained the whole situation to him. He was horrified by the level of harassment and helped me document everything: the messages, the emails, the calls, everything. He told me I had grounds for a restraining order if the situation escalated further, and that I should definitely send a cease and desist letter to Allison and Brandon, warning them that the harassment needed to stop immediately. I asked him to send the letters. It was a difficult decision, because I knew it was going to blow up the family situation even more, but I felt I had no choice. I couldn't live like this, constantly under attack, with my job at risk, with my mental health destroying itself every day. The letter basically said that all contact about the trust needed to cease immediately, that any additional harassment would result in legal action, and that they had no legal right to my personal inheritance. The reaction was exactly as bad as I imagined. Brandon called me screaming about how I dared threaten them with lawyers, that I had destroyed the family, that Mom was devastated. Allison sent me a series of text messages saying I was a psychopath, that she would make sure the whole family knew what kind of horrible person I was, and that she was going to make me regret this. I had to block their numbers. My parents also called me, both crying, saying they couldn't believe I'd taken this to lawyers, that I was tearing the family apart over money, that they never imagined raising such a cold daughter. I told them they had chosen this when they decided to support the harassment instead of defending me, and I hung up. I didn't talk to any of them for almost 2 months. During that time, I was destroyed. I cried almost every day, didn't sleep well, basically lived on takeout and coffee. And my boyfriend at the time, Daniel, was super understanding and supportive, though eventually the pressure from this whole situation also ended up affecting our relationship and we broke up months later, but that's another story. I had accepted that I'd basically lost my family, that I was going to spend future birthdays and Christmases alone, and I was trying to make peace with that. And then something happened that changed everything completely. Brandon accidentally sent a message to the family group chat that was clearly meant for Allison. It was one of those mistakes where you think you're in one conversation but you're actually in another. The message said something like, "Don't worry, baby. My mom is completely on our side. Keep pressuring the uncles, and eventually Ruby will give in because she won't want to be isolated from everyone. It's just a matter of time before we get the money." It was like someone had detonated a bomb in the family chat. Everyone saw it. My parents, the uncles who were in the chat, some cousins, and instead of deleting the message or trying to fix it, Brandon panicked and started sending messages trying to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, that I was misinterpreting, but the damage was already done. And then, because apparently the universe decided to give me a break, my cousin Tiffany, who wasn't in the group chat but to whom I forwarded the screenshot, did something brilliant. She was still friends with Allison on Facebook and had been monitoring her posts. Turns out Allison had been posting things on her personal Facebook, with privacy settings she thought were just for her friends, but which included Tiffany. Tiffany took screenshots of posts where Allison was basically bragging about how she'd manipulated my family, how she'd convinced my mom that I was selfish, and how she was going to get that money, one way or another, to have her dream wedding. There were messages from Allison with her friends where she made fun of my family, calling my parents hicks with their pathetic bakery, and saying Brandon was manageable, and that she basically had him eating out of her hand. There was a particularly horrible one where she said the only value she saw in marrying Brandon was potential access to my trust, and that she knew she'd eventually break me under family pressure. Tiffany compiled all of this and sent it to the family chat, without even asking me first. She just said, "I think everyone needs to see this," and dropped like 15 screenshots. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time watching it unfold. My uncle started sending shocked messages. My mom was sending question marks everywhere, trying to understand what was happening. My dad was in total silent mode. And Brandon started frantically calling Allison because clearly she hadn't seen the messages yet and didn't know she'd been exposed. When Allison finally realized, she tried to do damage control. She sent a long message to the chat saying those screenshots were out of context, that it was just her venting frustration with her friends, that she didn't really think those things. But it was too late. Everyone had already seen her true face, how she really thought about them, how she'd been manipulating the situation from the beginning. My mom called me that night, crying in a way I'd never heard her. She apologized over and over and over, saying she'd been an idiot, that she'd let Allison manipulate her, that she should never have doubted me. My dad took the phone and basically said the same thing, that he was so sorry, that they'd been completely wrong. I wanted to be angry, and part of me still was, but another part of me was just exhausted and relieved that they finally saw the truth. Brandon called me the next day. He sounded destroyed. He said he'd broken up with Allison, that he couldn't believe he'd let her do all that he'd been manipulated too, but that didn't excuse his behavior toward me. He apologized for everything, for the pressure, for the horrible comments, for letting the situation go so far. He said he'd understand if I never wanted to talk to him again, but that he hoped someday I could forgive him. Allison basically disappeared. She deleted all her social media, or at least blocked everyone who knew my family. There were rumors that her parents were furious with her over the scandal and had cut her off financially, but I don't know how true that is. What I do know is that all the wedding plans were canceled, obviously, and that she moved back in with her parents in the city. The following months were weird. My family was trying to rebuild the relationship with me, but it wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. My parents invited me to dinner every Sunday like before, and I went, but it was awkward. Brandon started therapy, which was surprising and honestly good for him, and slowly we started rebuilding something that resembled a sibling relationship. I set clear boundaries with everyone. I told them the trust was completely off limits as a conversation topic, that I wasn't going to tolerate any comments about my money or my financial decisions, and that if anyone violated these boundaries, I was going to walk away without thinking twice. To their credit, everyone has respected that so far. My mom has been trying particularly hard to make up for it. She makes all my favorite foods when I go visit them, calls me just to chat without any agenda, and has mentioned several times how much she regrets doubting me. My dad is quieter about it but has shown his regret in other ways, like showing up at my apartment to help me fix things without me asking, or texting me random articles he thinks might interest me. Brandon and I are in a slow process of rebuilding trust. He's working on himself, has gone back to taking classes at community college, and is trying to figure out what he really wants instead of just following what others expect of him. We've had some honest conversations about everything that happened, and even though it still hurts, I can see he's genuinely sorry. I turned 28 inches a couple months, which means in 2 years I'll have access to the trust. Honestly, I don't think about the money as much as I used to. This whole experience taught me that money can bring out the worst in people, even those you love and who you thought loved you unconditionally. It also taught me the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for myself, even when it means being alone for a while. Tiffany is still my favorite person in the world, and I basically consider her my real sister at this point. She was the only one who defended me when no one else would, and I'm never going to forget that. Brandon jokes now about how he's my blood brother, but Tiffany is my real sister, and even though he says it jokingly, there's some truth there that we all recognize. Last week, I went to visit my parents for my mom's birthday. The whole family was there, including the uncles who had participated in that horrible intervention. Some apologized to me directly, others just avoided my gaze, but no one mentioned the trust or anything related to all that drama. It was strangely normal, almost like we were all trying to pretend the last few months hadn't happened, but I know they did, and they know they did, and that permanently changed our family dynamic. I don't know if things will ever go back to the way they were before. Honestly, I don't think that's possible. But we're building something new, something that includes clear boundaries and mutual respect, and I guess that will have to be enough. At least now I know who the people around me really are, and even though it was a brutal lesson, maybe it was one I needed to learn.